And with me in the studio to talk about the U.S.-China ties after the U.S. Secretary of State visited to China, we have Mr. Teng Jianqun, who is Director of the American Studies Department at China Institute of International Studies. Meanwhile, in the studio, we also have Professor Liu Baocheng, who is the Dean of the Center for International Business Ethics at the University of International Business and Economics. And also, we are looking forward to an American panelist to join us in no time later in our program. First of all, may I ask you, Mr. Teng, what do you make of the fact that the communications over the weekend, when it comes to U.S.-China relations, had a lot to do with what is going on in the South China Sea? Will this relation be bogged down by some of the very few current events?
I don't think South China Sea, dispute this time, has been put on the top agenda of John Kerry's visit to Beijing. He has at least two assignments. The first is to finalize the agenda for the strategic and economic dialogue, which will be coming next month, and also for the preparation of our President Xi Jinping's state visit to D.C. and New York. So this time, actually this is an echo from the U.S. officials to the debate in the United States on South China Sea dispute this time.
All right, let me ask also Mr. Douglas Paul, who is now joining us. He is the Vice President for Studies at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Sir, it's a great pleasure to have you on our show as well. Let me ask you about South China Sea. The U.S. Secretary of State, John Kerry, said, quote, U.S. has concerns over the pace and also the realities of what's going on in the South China Sea. What do you think is the U.S. stance, really? Because U.S. describes itself not to have a stance, yet for freedom of navigation. Exactly how can we interpret all of this information? Can you explain to us in a way that we could understand?
Well, my impression is that the Kerry visit to Beijing has been an opportunity for the administration to pull back from its narrow focus on the South China Sea and look more broadly at U.S.-China relations, and in the context of the upcoming strategic and economic dialogue next month as preparation for the visit by Xi Jinping to Washington and New York in September. And the preoccupation in the U.S. over the last couple of months has been Chinese landfills in the South China Sea, and whether China is trying to interpret these filling up of subsurface features in the South China Sea as efforts to create sovereign land, sovereign islands, which would be illegal under the law of the sea and which would limit the freedom of navigation if accepted by maritime nations. So it's important that this be resolved. It's not an insignificant dispute, but it's not the sum total of U.S.-China relations. And I think that the Kerry visit has signaled putting it into perspective, dealing with it as a dispute. And we heard that from Xi Jinping and Minister Wang Yi as well.
Okay, let me ask Mr. Teng about what the Chinese responses are, and how do you respond, first of all, to Mr. Paul's statement about some of the disagreements, at least, as to what it really belongs to the issues when we discuss South China Sea. What is the China framework?
Actually, South China Sea has become the bargaining stake in the hand of the United States when it announced the pivot or rebalance strategy toward Asia-Pacific region. I can tell a story. In early 1987, the UN Education, Scientific, and Cultural Organization adopted a resolution, gave the assignment to Chinese government to construct the observation station in Nansha Island, number 74. So according to that resolution by UN, actually today's construction in South China Sea is a continuation for the Chinese government to improve the observation station and also to improve the condition for the living standard for our soldiers and the workers there.
Okay, now both sides have already stated your stance. Now let me ask you, this time, Chinese President Xi Jinping, when meeting with Mr. Kerry, the Secretary of State, he said, quote, Pacific Ocean is vast enough to embrace both the United States and China, end of quote. What do you think is the nature of this attitude? Obviously, Mr. Xi did not specifically mention about South China Sea and many other specific issues, but does this, in a way, sentence categorize the nature that China is looking when it comes to different opinions and also views with the United States on various issues?
Actually, this is a different attitudes between China and the United States toward the Pacific Ocean or Asia Pacific region. You know, we proposed that Pacific Ocean is large enough to embrace the two large countries, but to our understanding, to my observation, you know, some American observers or experts said, no, this is not the logical, you know, argument for the two countries. Actually, this is an ocean of the United States.
All right.
China prefers to, you know, share the, you know, the ocean with the United States. No, this is not the answer.
Let me ask you, Mr.
States.
Paul, how can we make sure that issues are not being looked at between China and the United States with a zero-sum game mentality, which of course China experts like you have been arguing against. But the thing is how to implement that in the daily debates going on both in Washington, D.C. and also here in Beijing.
Well, as someone who once served in executive branch positions, I think that the primary responsibility is the government. The executive branch should have its officials out articulating the non-zero-sum approach. And yet they're often find themselves responding to the 24-hour media inquiries with quick responses, being summoned before committees of Congress to address very narrow and specific issue areas, rather than seizing those as opportunities to put a broader picture before the public. And this has been an especially bad problem over the last 18 months, where the Obama administration, with the exception of the Obama visit to Beijing in November, has largely been focused on narrow and short-term considerations in its public declarations. And this makes it a field day for sensationalist media to then get very excited about each and every little new development. And we're also sort of get caught up in this back and forth, the pro and con, and we don't look at our longer term interests. Not really since the U.S. embarked on the rebalance to Asia have we had another look at how to reinforce that. I think perhaps very soon you're going to see a change in the narrative, because the Trans-Pacific Partnership agreement, which is coming among 12 countries in the Asia-Pacific region, is going to be a transformative argument about building a new kind of economy in the Asia-Pacific, and I think that'll be a more positive theme on which I hope China will pay attention.
Well, positive in what way, Mr. Paul? Because we also understand this is a part of the election year you are having in Washington, and it could be very tricky during this time of every 4 years. So is it really likely to get better, commonly believed sense, or actually it's getting ever more dramatic? And if I could use some of the words by some experts.
Well, you have to distinguish between what governments do and say and what other people who are not responsible do and say. The candidates, we're going to have 10 people on the stage for the Republican debates just in that party, and they're going to be trying to sound tougher and meaner than the other as they go forward. And it's going to lead to a lot of convenient pick-up lines from the debates that will then be taken by the media to try to get more fights going among the candidates to make it more interesting for the readers. Governments have to keep cool, calm, and collected.
Okay, if I remember right, Mr. Paul, in many of the earlier programs with us, have been talking and commenting about the Obama administration's unwillingness to talk about the AIIB and play an active role for the United States in the AIIB.